Hi everybody, my name's Rodney Mohr and I wanted to talk to you today about alternative tip materials. So one of the common repairs to a bow is going to be a tip replacement. When I look at a bow and try to decide the type of material I'm going to use, I think about a lot of things. One of them is what did the tip look like on this bow originally? So I do a little research. If it's a known bow, Sartori or some named bow like that, I'll get out my books and see what original tips looked like. So often a tip has been replaced and the thicknesses of the materials just aren't right. So that's one of the things that I consider when I'm doing that. Another thing you might think about is international travel. Is this person going to be going through customs? Are they going to be concerned about taking something with a mammoth ivory tip, say, instead of a plastic material? So those are some of the things that you want to consider when you're replacing a tip. So our materials that we have available to us are abalone. Abalone, you would only really put this on really expensive bows, maybe even part of a package of whatever is going on the frog. It's ridiculously hard to work, and it's really not an option for most tip replacement. So we'll put that aside. So another material that would have been used or is used now is sterling silver, or you could use gold, depending on what the rest of the bow is mounted with. Of course, silver was used pretty extensively with the hill shop. It's very durable, of course. Most hill bows still have their original tips on them. A few drawbacks are one, that you have to put pins to hold this in place. And it's also a little bit heavier than any of the other materials. The one caveat I would say about silver is if you're going to put silver on a existing bow and that bow did not have a silver tip on it originally, please don't pin this on. Hopefully someday a ivory replacement material will be put on instead of the silver. So we don't want to do that. Plus, you can actually damage the bow by putting the pins in it. So our next material, and this would be a natural material, is Mammoth Ivory. And of course, it looks a lot like elephant ivory, very similar material. It's a little bit more kind of a caramely color sometimes. It works very easily. Its one drawback would be that because it looks so much like elephant ivory, that you might have a little bit of trouble with international travel with it. So, and then of course in some states now it's not legal to purchase mammoth ivory. So that one is may or may not be available to you. So our next material is casein. Casein is a plastic that's made out of skim milk. And it's very early. Plastic's been around for more than 100 years. It's one of the things that makes it very attractive is that it has the lines in it like elephant ivory would have in it. But from my experience, this material is a little bit fragile in that we've seen many bows with cracks in each corner of the mortise. And so I would be a little cautious of using this material, especially if a bow is going to get a lot of rehairs. It might not be the best material to use, but it is attractive. So our next material is just a simple plastic. This is available from any vendor. It is the type of material you would see usually on very inexpensive bows. It works, of course, but it's biggest drawback is that the material isn't very strong in the corner of the mortise. It's soft enough that when you try to pry out a plug, especially when somebody's glued in place, you can leave pretty big dents in it and maybe even crack the corners. So while this is very useful for inexpensive bows, it's not a material that I use to do tip replacements. So the next material is marketed as Elfrin. It's again another plastic material. It's much tougher than the inexpensive plastic. It's probably its only real drawbacks is that it's still a little bit tender in the corners of the mortise, and but still it's very attractive material. It looks like looks from arm's length. It looks like an ivory, so it's definitely something I would recommend for better quality bows. So the next material is a material called tip armor. And this is actually a micarta. It's been around for over 100 years. It has a matrix of cotton or linen in it. And it is very tough in the corners of the mortise. It's also probably the most difficult of these materials to use just because it has that fiber in it. This is pretty much my go-to material for most bows. The only drawback with this is that the little point, the little nose, once you've trimmed it down, is a little bit tender, and so you have to be careful when you're shaping it, and you want to shape it in a way so that it's not easily hooked and pulled off of the end of the bow. But again, this is my go-to material. And the last of my alternative ivory-like materials. This one is a new one. It's being marketed as a tip shield. Again, another plastics, good color. It is really tough stuff. You can't break the tip off of this. We've actually stuck it in a vise and taken a pair of pliers, and you can, with all your might, you can tear it apart, but that's not something likely to happen with a bow, fortunately. It's, again, all these plastics are a little bit softer than ivory, so you have to be a little bit careful with them when you're prying out the plugs. The one thing about this is that you can, all these others, you can heat them and bend them, and after they've cooled, they will hold that shape. This plastic will not do that, so it may not be the best material to use on a head that has a lot of curve in it. But again, I think this is going to be a very useful material. So typically an ivory tip is going to have an ebony liner underneath it. This is a 1/2 millimeter liner. Some bows, like the early Tubbs and Dodds, had a thicker ebony liner on it. But the problem with this material is that it's well, not so thin, but it's just not very strong across the grain. You can easily bend this and break this. So it's not my favorite material for a tip replacement, unless, of course, I'm doing one of those Dodd or Tubbs bows. So my last material here, this is something that I've developed. It is actually 5 to 7 layers of silk, black silk with epoxy. And it's been pressed flat so that it's a homogeneous thickness. This material is super tough, and I think this is a great material to use on bows that have cracks in the at the back of the head or the sides of the mortise. Help hold those cracks together. It's much tougher than ebony. You just can't tear this. The other benefits is since it's a natural material, it's much easier to work than say if you were going to try to use carbon fiber or something like that. It's just won't work very well with files. So I think this is something you can make yourself, and it's really quite useful. So this gives us a lot to think about. The types of materials that we're going to use. Is the bow going to be used for international travel? Do we want to not use Mammoth Ivory? Do we want to use a plastic tip? We also have to think about, are we going to change the look of this bow? We want to try to use the same thicknesses of materials, ebony and the tip material. And we want to try to make the bow look like it did originally. It's not our job to put our little twist on the bow. So again, a lot to think about, and thanks a lot.